to 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 or 10 in the southwest, and the highest temperatures likely across northern Scotland, where we could get to 11 or 12 in Aberdeenshire. Still quite windy here, though, through the evening and overnight. The rain could pep up across Shetland and Orkney, but elsewhere it's dry. And again, across the Midlands, southern and eastern England, most of Wales, it's all about the frost returning this evening pretty quickly, and the fog also thickening up once more. Probably a bit more widespread than last night, and again quite dense for tomorrow morning's rush hour. So again, just bear that in mind. Dense fog will take a long time to clear at this time of year. In fact, for some locations it may take until well into the afternoon. Generally though, another fine bright sunny day, patchy cloud and rain across northern Scotland, but say generally quite a bit of sunshine after we start with the frost temperatures ticking up to 6, 7 degrees generally. Still feeling pretty chilly, and if the fog sticks, which it will do in some locations into the afternoon, temperatures could really struggle. But a lot of dry weather with that high pressure sitting around for the next few days. Some sunshine by day, chilly mornings, especially so in the south, and some stubborn fog patches as well.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
A very good morning. You're watching GB News. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date with the latest headlines. Now, the first story. Boris Johnson is facing growing calls to quit as Prime Minister from some senior Conservative MPs. Among those demanding his resignation is the Scottish Conservative leader, Douglas Ross. The Prime Minister apologised yesterday for attending a Bring Your Own Booze party in the Downing Street Garden in May 2020, when the country was in lockdown. It's as Mr Johnson pulls out of a planned visit to a vaccination centre today due to, he says, a family member testing positive for coronavirus. Voters in Leigh in Greater Manchester are divided on whether the Prime Minister should stay in his job.
We'll look back at this and we'll probably say, you know, he's done a good job in the circumstances he was in, but could he have done things better? Yes, he could. Has he made mistakes? He certainly has.
He sounded all right at the beginning, but he's not now. He's just contradicted every rule he's made for everybody else follow, but not doing it himself.
I think he's doing so bad with all this corona and that. I don't think he's done so bad.
It should lead by example. If he could go to a garden party, why couldn't I serve my customers?
England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jonathan Van Tam, is leaving his role at the end of March. He's been one of the key scientific figures during the coronavirus pandemic and was recently knighted in the New Year's honours list. The Prime Minister has thanked him for his invaluable service. Latest figures show a record 6 million people in England were waiting to start routine hospital treatment. NHS England say those figures are for November of last year, and the number of people waiting for treatment is now at its highest since records began in 2007. Prince Andrew faces the prospect of giving evidence in court later this year in New York. It's after a US judge threw out a motion to dismiss a civil sex abuse case against him. The judge ruled in 2009 that the 2009 agreement between his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, and the convicted sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein, didn't extend to the prince. Ms. Giuffre is suing Prince Andrew over claims he sexually assaulted her when she was 17, 2 decades ago. The Duke of York denies all the allegations. An attorney who represented 20 of Epstein's victims, Gloria Allred, says testifying under oath won't be easy for Prince Andrew.
He's going to have to do a risk analysis, Prince Andrew. And, of course, there's not going to be a settlement unless Virginia offers to settle and gets what she thinks she should get for a settlement. Her lawyers also have to assess the risk to her if she doesn't settle.
France has lifted its ban on UK holidaymakers. The French tourism minister says thousands of people who booked ski trips will now be able to hit the slopes from tomorrow. Fully vaccinated travellers will have to have a negative COVID test within 24 hours of departure, but they won't have to isolate when they get to France. There's a warning: the care system for disabled and older people is under grim and relentless pressure during the pandemic. The National Care Forum, which represents not-for-profit care providers across the UK, says existing staff shortages are being exacerbated by absences caused by the Omicron variant of coronavirus. The government says it is providing more than £460 million to help recruit and retain care staff. An investigation has found more than 100,000 people who had their benefits cut by mistake have been denied compensation. The Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman has called for ministers to correct what he called an injustice caused by errors from the Department of Work and Pensions. The government says it has since corrected the mistake and paid arrears totalling £613 million to those affected. They didn't address the issue of compensation. Post-Brexit talks resume today, with the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, holding face-to-face meetings for the first time as the UK's lead negotiator. She's invited her EU counterpart, Maroš Šefčovič, to her official country house to discuss problems with the Northern Ireland Protocol. The Foreign Secretary says Europe has a clear responsibility to help protect the Good Friday Agreement. Tennis player Novak Djokovic has been included in the Australian Open, despite Australia still considering cancelling the player's visa. The Serbian was drawn against his fellow countryman, Miomir Kecmanovic, in the first round. The draw was postponed for 75 minutes without explanation. A decision from Australia's immigration minister on whether the world number one can stay in the country is not expected until Friday. You're up to date now here on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Right now, to the point.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Lauren Eman and Patrick Christie on your TV and your radio. We've got a show full of all of the big stories and big discussions that you care about today, so here's what's on the menu.
Yes, well, was Boris Johnson's apology enough to save him, do you think? The Prime Minister continues to plummet in the polls, and now some of his own MPs are actually calling on him to resign. We'll be getting your views and giving you expert analysis throughout the show, but also I'm really asking, do you think now that the government should hand back the COVID fines?
Yes, and also a judge in the US unequivocally rejected Prince Andrew's lawyer's bid to have his sex abuse case thrown out of court. What does this mean for the Prince and for the royal family? We'll be taking you throughout all of this controversy in the next hour.
Yeah, we will indeed. And where are we with COVID? Amid speculation that the UK could be the first country to emerge fully from restrictions and talk of a reduction in the isolation period, how are different areas of the country doing? We've got all that and much more.
Yes, indeed. We'll be telling you out through all the show, and make sure that you get in touch with your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, as usual, Patrick gives his views on COVID fines and the Downing Street garden party.
It's time to hand the COVID fines back. Not just because Boris Johnson and Downing Street staff broke the rules, but because the police, it seems, allowed it to happen. Now, I wondered whether or not there could be any way on earth that the police officers at Downing Street didn't know that there was an illegal gathering going on. So I decided to ask yesterday a former police officer on my show, a former police officer who actually used to work at Downing Street. And here's what he had to say.
Agree with that. I would say that that's been a little unkind to them in terms of the fact that if they had strong support behind them, inspector, superintendent, commander level, actually being on call and saying, look, Boris, or frankly, Boris is misbehaving again, because let's face it, he does all sorts of things that are potentially breaching regulations, who would then be prepared to intervene. They might feel perhaps they'll step up to the plate. But on the point of investigating, I think we've got to be careful here that the Metropolitan Police don't end up being dragged into being, if you like, the political referee between people who are understandably howling for the Prime Minister to step aside and people on the other side saying he shouldn't.
So it looks as though they turned a blind eye, really. Now, I personally don't think that these rules should have been in place at all anyway, so I'm not massively bothered about it. But the fact is that the same week that the booze was flowing and the pizza was sizzling in Downing Street, 807 people were fined for breaking COVID rules. In the week between the 15th and the 21st of May 2020, police handed out 807 fixed penalty notices under COVID laws in England and Wales. That's data from the National Police Chiefs Council. At the time, the default fine for breaking the law had been recently raised, actually, from £60 to £100, rising to a maximum of £3,200 for repeat offenders. There was no formal appeal mechanism in place, meaning that anyone wanting to contest a fine had to risk prosecution by refusing to pay. But get this, of some of those brave souls who decided to try it on and risk the prosecution, a third of them were found to be unlawful fines. That's a pretty high number, isn't it? I was having a look at some of the ridiculous things that people were fined for, right? And I don't think it gets better than this. So 2 divers got into difficulty. Right, there was a massive search and rescue operation launched for them off the coast. We're talking helicopters, lifeboats, a Royal Navy ship, HMS Tyne. After 2 hours of searching, a sailor on the Navy ship spotted a lone diver 3 miles from where he'd entered the water. This bloke, he was freezing. He just survived a near-death experience. He was clinging to life. Anyway, when he was brought back to land, they decided that they were going to treat him. They wrapped one of those foil blankets around him. He was shivering away. And then he was fined for breaking COVID rules. I know, right? This is another one that's insane. As the landlord of a pub, Milnesthorpe Hotel, actually it is, near Pontefract. Anyway, he was fined £1,000 for breaking coronavirus laws in October 2020. Why? Well, because punters leapt up from their seats when Leeds United scored against Manchester City, just as council officials and local police were checking that COVID regulations were being followed in the area. At the time, drinkers were only allowed to remain seated in groups of no more than 6. A man was fined for eating a kebab in his car at Cheddar Gorge. One woman said in May 2020 she often went to Kensington Park Gardens for her permitted exercise. And one afternoon, she said a Met police officer was patrolling the park from a car and shouted at her for leaning forwards on her stationary bicycle whilst reading a book. She told the Mail Online, well, I told him I was just resting, and he shouted, no, you're not, you're reading. Not willing to equate the two, he then yelled, I'm not going to sit here arguing with you, move. But all this joking aside, right, this is the way the police were behaving towards ordinary people. It's bully boy tactics and egregious fines. It's like the Stasi. The police were able to track down a woman who travelled to a 97-year-old mother's care home, which had COVID in the site, in the place, pull the car into a service station and arrest her, right, before taking her mum back to the care home. The fact is that whilst these fines were being dished out to people, there was cheese and wine on the go in Downing Street, and the police were unable to detect any of that, were they? Both those in Downing Street and the police collectively have the power to hand the public's fines back. And I think they should exercise that power. I do think it was interesting yesterday that Keir Starmer didn't really go after Boris too much for actually breaking the rules. He went after him more for lying. Why is that? Could it be that Starmer himself broke the rules? Mark Drakeford in Wales, he's been filmed breaking the rules. Look at the media. Kay Burley, Beth Rigby. They've got a bit of a nerve having a pop at Boris after their little party, haven't they? Peston was videoed massless in Downing Street at a press conference. Nobody's squeaky clean. Nobody got the rules 100% right 100% of the time. Boris Johnson kind of apologised a bit yesterday, didn't he? But the fact is, this has gone down incredibly badly with many people. It's had cut through, actually. Sometimes, just sometimes, when you're apologising, a gesture can be a good way to go, can't it? Handing people's COVID fines back would be a pretty good gesture. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with you. You know, as I've expressed over the last few days, I think that would be a very good gesture to show that actually, you know, we, by and large, overwhelmingly in this country had high compliance rates. And just the little skirmishes, the little things that didn't go completely right, I think we can let it go as we move on into living with COVID now.
Yeah, I think so. Look, I think when you look at some of the ridiculous reasons there why people were fined, and frankly some of the just downright wrong ways that people were fined, and the way people were treated as well, look, I certainly think at the very least on that day that they were having their little outside gathering or whatever, maybe that day they could hand back everyone's fines he was given. Just do something really, because
I don't think that day is the only day that rules were probably
No.
broken. But I guess continuing on in this conversation with Boris Johnson's future as Prime Minister hanging in the balance following calls for his resignation. Yesterday in Parliament, the PM apologised for the Bring Your Own Booze party that took place in the Downing Street Garden in May 2020 when the rest of the country was in lockdown.
Well, he claims that he thought it was a work event, and the scandal has prompted, obviously, furious Tory MPs to call for his resignation. Quite a lot to the north of the border as well, it must be said. Well,
yes.
Boris Johnson hopes the outcome, of course, this independent investigation will save him. That's what he's clinging on to, isn't it, really? He's trying to kick the can down the road, really. So our political reporter, Tom Harwood, I believe, joins us now.
Political editor Darren McCaffrey, I think.
Oh, well, there you go.
Apologies.
Turns out Tom's changed. I didn't think Tom had got there quick. He was only in here a minute ago, you know? But anyway, there you go.
Yes, well, Darren, tell us, Boris must be having sleepless nights right now. Tell us the latest.
Yeah, indeed. Interesting listening to your discussion there, and I am Patrick, about the rules. Of course, what the Prime Minister did yesterday was not say sorry. He apologised for the perception that people may well have had that mistakes were made within government, but he made it clear that he felt that whatever went on May 20th in the garden, in Downing Street behind me, that it was probably technically within the rules. And I think that is actually why there is anger amongst Conservative MPs that yesterday's so-called apology was not as fulsome as they would have wanted. Now, clearly Boris Johnson, he would argue, feels that he hasn't broken rules, that he made a mistake about an event that he thought was a work event, though to almost everyone else there it simply appeared as a social event, not least of all following that email about bring your own booze. But also that if he was to admit, of course, that he had broken the rules, that would be admitting he was in the wrong, and that is not where he is at. He is insisting he's going to wait for Sue Gray's investigation. So technically where we stand at the moment is the Prime Minister is apologising for the perception that rule breaking may well have happened, not the reality that it could well have happened. Tory MPs, you're right in saying they are pretty furious on the large about all of this. Only 4, though, publicly calling for him to go. Many others, though, privately very frustrated, essentially giving him a bit of time to wait for that formal investigation. That's not necessarily true everywhere, though. In Scotland, we believe all MSPs in the Scottish Parliament, Conservative MSPs, are calling for him to go, including the leader, Douglas Ross. And in addition to all of this, Patrick, the polls are looking pretty dire. A poll published last night by YouGov and The Times, which was done before Prime Minister's Question Time, saw the Conservative Party support slump to its lowest level in nearly 10 years, down to 28 points. Labour opening up a 10-point lead. As for the Prime Minister, well, he's just cancelled a planned visit today, blaming a COVID-positive case within his family, which means he can't travel up to a vaccination centre. Very much the bunker mentality continues inside Downing Street. I think they've got the view, the less said, the better.
Well, thank you so much, Darren, for giving us that update. Political editor Darren McCaffrey. Well, joining us now also to discuss this is Richard Tice, leader of Reform UK. Thank you for joining us this morning, Richard. I mean, can Boris have gone even further in Prime Minister's question? Do you think that his apology was enough?
I don't, actually, and very good morning to you. No, I don't. Look, the reality is he's caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. If he went much further, then he's basically opening himself up to the investigation that looks as though it's going to take place by the police. I think what's really winding people up, myself included, is the hypocrisy of it all. Sending a cabinet minister out on TV to tell everybody to stay locked up in their homes. If we're really good, if we're really lucky, then yes, we can stand outside and meet one other person if we're 2 meters apart. Within an hour of that, there's 30 or 40 of them at a pre-arranged gathering stroke party with a bunch of booze on tables, having a great time. I mean, seriously, how could you think in any shape or form that that was appropriate? That's what's winding people up. And I think here's another thing that hasn't really come out from yesterday. Keir Starmer alluded to it. But before Christmas, let's remember that the Prime Minister stood at the dispatch box, and said he was furious with these stories of parties and that he was shocked. And yet clearly he knew about them because actually it turns out he had attended some of them. And I think that is, I think it's very serious. What he's done essentially is he's bought himself however long before the inquiry, and it's interesting that there seems to be no timetable on that, which is not good in itself. He's bought himself a bit of time to see the mood of the party, but I think the mood is going south very quickly.
Well, it does appear that way, and from what I can detect as well, there are certainly rather a few letters going in, that's for sure. I just wonder, though, if it emerges that Keir Starmer's broken the rules as well, does he have to go? Mark Drakeford was videoed breaking them, does he have to go?
I think there's a slight difference here, Patrick, which is firstly that it was the Prime Minister and his team that were setting the rules. That's point number one. And the other point is that the Prime Minister stood at the dispatch box and said that he hadn't attended parties and that he was furious about learning about them. And it had, so I do think there is a difference. And it's the hypocrisy of it, particularly at a time when so many people, they couldn't say goodbye to their loved ones who were dying in hospital beds. They couldn't bury your own loved ones. This was horrendous. And we actually know that the rules at the time were totally unjustified, and they clearly weren't afraid of the virus themselves because they were happy to meet. So why were they imposing those rules on the rest of us? Draconian, totally unjustified. I think the Prime Minister's in real trouble. I'm not sure he survives until this inquiry.
And also, Richard Tice, I mean, you're the leader of Reform UK. Some people are saying that the Tories, in order to actually be held properly accountable, they generally need a challenger from the right. I mean, do you agree with that assessment that actually, if there is somebody that's going to be taking over from Boris, they need someone actually much more conservative, much more right-wing, in a sense, to actually hold the Tories' feet to the fire?
I think the one Conservative that I can see within the Conservative Party at the moment, sadly, is a Lord as opposed to an MP. It's Lord David Frost, who had the integrity and the principle to resign from the government just before Christmas. And he's given an interview, I think, to the Telegraph, which is in this morning, I think, and where actually he sets out the same things that we stand for, which is cutting taxes hard, having a sensible energy policy as opposed to what I call the net stupid energy policies that this government has adopted. He seems to have some proper, sensible, real Conservative values. And, yes, the reality is, in the run-up to these elections, in the run-up to the general election in a couple of years' time, there needs to be a proper tax-cutting, sensible suite of policies about energy, about reforming the health system, and about a proper way to secure our borders firmly and robustly. And that's what Reform UK stands for, and no one else does.
OK, well, look, Rich, thank you very, very much, as always, for your time. Richard Tice, their leader of Reform UK, just whizzing us through his views, anyway, in relation to Boris Johnson. I find it fascinating. I think there are a couple of things there. As long as Boris Johnson is in charge now, as long as he stays in charge, I don't see how we can have any more restrictions going forward whatsoever. I don't see how there's any moral justification for it. And actually, I quite like those odds. If he goes, then we might get someone in who's just at the drop of a... I mean, if Labour are in, we'd probably still be locked down.
Well, no. There were people, in the government that have been pushing for more open restrictions. such as Rishi Sunak, Sajid Javid. There were other people that were arguing the other case. You had kind of quite lockdown hawks in other areas of the government, like Matt Hancock. Thankfully, he's not necessarily the health secretary anymore. So I think there are debates going on even in the Conservative Party. But in my view, I think it's very difficult to have a Prime Minister that is not governing with a moral compass.
Well, there you go. Well, anyway, what do you think? Keep these views coming in. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Loads of them have been so far. We'll go to them very shortly. But after the break, we'll be going live to the author of the book, Prince Andrew, Epstein, Maxwell and the Palace. So go right to the top there, aren't we? But first, it's the weather.
Good morning. A cold one out there again across the south this morning with a frost for many. Not quite as cold further north. There is more cloud around, but for many it's going to be a sparkling day of winter sunshine, courtesy of this area of high pressure that's been moving in over the past day or so and is set to stick around for at least another couple of days. There are more isobars on the chart across Scotland, suggesting it is windier here. It was a windy day yesterday and still pretty blustery over the Highlands, the Western Isles and the Northern Isles, with some showery rain likely here. Otherwise, it's mostly dry, but for Northern Ireland, northwest England, quite a lot of clouds. Elsewhere, though, quite a lot of sunshine. There are some thick fog patches this morning. They may take a few hours to clear away, so just be aware of that if you're just heading out on the roads. But once they've gone, temperatures creeping up to 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 or 10 in the southwest, and the highest temperatures likely across northern Scotland, where we could get to 11 or 12 in Aberdeenshire. Still quite windy here, though, through the evening and overnight. The rain could pep up across Shetland and Orkney, but elsewhere it's dry. And again, across the Midlands, southern and eastern England, most of Wales, it's all about the frost returning this evening pretty quickly, and the fog also thickening up once more. Probably a bit more widespread than last night, and again quite dense for tomorrow morning's rush hour. So again, just bear that in mind. Dense fog will take a long time to clear at this time of year. In fact, for some locations it may take until well into the afternoon. Generally, though, another fine, bright, sunny day. Patchy cloud and rain across northern Scotland, but say generally quite a bit of sunshine after we start with the frost. Temperatures ticking up to 6, 7 degrees generally. Still feeling pretty chilly, and if the fog sticks, which it will do in some locations into the afternoon, temperatures could really struggle. But a lot of dry weather with that high pressure sitting around for the next few days. Some sunshine by day, chilly mornings, especially so in the south, and some stubborn fog patches as well.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
A very good morning. It is 10:30. I'm Rosie Wright in the GB News newsroom. Let's get you up to date. Boris Johnson has cancelled a visit to a vaccination clinic today. Downing Street say it's because a family member of his has tested positive for coronavirus. It's as he's facing growing calls to quit as Prime Minister from some senior Conservative MPs, including the Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross. The Prime Minister apologised yesterday for attending a Bring Your Own Booze party in the Downing Street Garden in May 2020, when the country was in lockdown. England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jonathan Van Tam, is leaving his role at the end of March. He's been one of the key scientific figures during the coronavirus pandemic and was recently knighted in the New Year's Honours List. The Prime Minister has thanked him for his invaluable service. Prince Andrew faces the prospect of giving evidence in court later this year in New York. It's after a US judge threw out a motion to dismiss a civil sex abuse case against the royal. The judge ruled a 2009 agreement between his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein didn't extend to the prince. Ms Giuffre is suing Prince Andrew over claims he sexually assaulted her when she was 17, 2 decades ago. The prince denies all the allegations. A new report has found that England's rivers are filled with what's been described as a chemical cocktail of sewage, agricultural waste and plastic. Well, it's the finding from a group of cross-party MPs who said the waterways were a risk to public health and to nature. Parliament's Environmental Audit Committee blamed England's dirty water on chronic underinvestment and multiple failures in governance. The tennis player Novak Djokovic has been included in the Australian Open first-round draw, despite the country still considering cancelling the player's visa. The Serbian was drawn against his fellow countryman Miomir Kemanovic in the first round. A decision from Australia's immigration minister on whether the world number one can stay in the country is not expected until Friday. You're up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online, DAB plus radio. Let's get you back now, though, to the point.
Hello, everybody. Now it's 10:32 a.m. This is To The Point with me, Patrick, Christys and Inaya Falarin Imam, right here on GB News. And, of course, we are live on your TV and on your radio as well.
Yes, in the news, a New York judge has ruled Prince Andrew will face a civil sex abuse trial in the United States later this year. Virginia Giuffre claims that she was sexually abused by the Duke in 2001 when she was just 17 years old.
Well, the Duke of York strongly denies the allegations, obviously, but we're hoping now to be joined, I believe, by Nigel Cawthorne, who, of course, wrote a seminal piece on this very, very topic. So, Nigel, thank you very, very much for being on the show with us. What does this all really mean for Prince Andrew, then? I mean, he could settle, couldn't he? But the court of public opinion, that doesn't look too good. Talk me through your views on it.
Well, I mean, it gets worse and worse for Prince Andrew. That yes, there was a possibility of him settling. It would be a nice excuse to say, look, I don't want to spoil the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, so no matter how much it costs, we'll get rid of this. I mean, first of all, I think the British taxpayer would kind of wonder where the money's coming from. But it doesn't seem that Virginia Giuffre wants to settle without some admission of fault on his behalf and an apology, which he plainly isn't prepared to give.
And just take us back a little bit. Why are his lawyers saying that the complaint should be dismissed?
Well, there were two reasons. One that was thrown out earlier on, that in her complaint she said she was living in Colorado when the defence maintained that she was living in Australia. And the other one was that Virginia Giuffre made a settlement with Jeffrey Epstein back in 2009 for $500,000 in a sex trafficking case. And a part of that settlement was that she wouldn't take action against any other potential defendant. And Prince Andrew's defence argued that he was a potential defendant in that case, but nobody's accused him of sex trafficking. Would he be even worse than the situation he's in now?
Yeah, well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because initially I thought, well, hang on, how can he not be a potential defendant in that case? But it is the difference, isn't it? It's a different charge, isn't it? Really?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I mean, we must remember that she's accusing him of sexual abuse and rape in the first degree. I mean, very serious charges.
They are very serious charges. Now, in the actual process that takes place now, because this is going to be a civil case, right? So a civil sex case. What could be the worst-case scenario for Prince Andrew?
Well, there's certainly no good outcome from this. I mean, he could simply refuse to go along with the case and not turn up, and there would be a default judgment against him. Again, there'll be massive damages for him to pay, and we'd all ask where the cash was coming from. And secondly,
where is it coming from? Sorry, just out of interest. Sorry, just out of interest. Where is it coming from? Where is the cash coming from?
Well, so far, it's been reported that the Queen is paying for his defence out of money coming from the Duchy of Lancaster, which seems to be rather odd because the Duchy of Lancaster it doesn't belong to the Queen. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster is actually a member of the cabinet, but the income from the Duchy goes to the sovereign to pay for their official duties. And I don't think defending your errant son in a sleazy sex case in a foreign court is actually an official duty.
No, it would be weird if it was, to be fair, but the way it's going, you never know, do you, I suppose? But there we are.
I mean, so how do you think this is going to affect the royal family? I mean, the Queen's Jubilee is coming up. I mean, this is obviously not great news at all, is it?
Well, it's going to cast a very dark cloud over it, and obviously at every event in the summer, every commentator is going to say, well, where's Prince Andrew? He's going to be conspicuous by his absence.
Yeah, he's going to be conspicuous by his absence, and yeah, no, it's. I feel very sorry for his daughters as well, to be honest with you. Obviously, he denies all these charges. Don't get me wrong, but it's just the fact that they're all being dragged through it, regardless, isn't it? Really, I think, and no doubt the Queen will not be too pleased either. Nigel, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we'll speak to you again very soon. It sounds like we will, because this is going to rumble on, isn't it? Nigel Cawthorne, there, author of Prince Andrew, Epstein, Maxwell, and the Palace. Gosh, it is really lewd stuff, isn't it? All of this.
It doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon.
No, well, coming up on the show, over 200,000 migrants are set to arrive despite Brexit. A professor shares his views with us, but before that, here's a look at this morning's news, actually. Oh, we're going to a break instead, actually. Sorry, okay.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Yes, well, good morning, everybody. It's 10:40, and this is To The Point with me, Patrick, Christys, and Anaya Falarineman on GB News. Now, look, we're live on your TV, but don't forget as well, we are also now on your radio.
Yes, we're carrying on with the Downing Street Partygate. Our North West reporter, Bradley Harris, is in the former mining town of Leigh in Greater Manchester. Thank you for joining us this morning, Bradley. A Labour stronghold for almost a century that voted Conservative for the first time in 2019. Bradley, how are voters feeling today?
Yeah, well, I think it's mixed, to be honest. If we look back a couple of years ago, many voters here did the unthinkable and turned, as you say, this red wall Labour town to Conservative blue. James Grundy, the Conservative MP, took hold of this seat in 2019 in the general election, once held by Andy Burnham, the current Mayor of Greater Manchester. So people said to me, I've got to come to Leigh to find out what people think. Do people still think in the same way that this town voted just over 2 years ago? And it's interesting because I've been hearing people's thoughts on this. As I say, very mixed. Let's just hear some of those thoughts now.
We'll look back at this and we'll probably say, you know, he's done a good job in the circumstances he was in, but could he have done things better? Yes, he could. Has he made mistakes? He certainly has.
He sounded all right at the beginning, but he's not now. He's just contradicted every rule he's made for everybody else follow, but not doing it himself.
Like the saying goes, never trust a Tory. That's all you have to say, really, don't you? I should have resigned long ago.
So he's had a part of it. I mean, for all we know, he might have been following all the rules himself. We don't know, do we? I don't think he's doing so bad with all this corona and that. I don't think he's done so bad.
He should lead by example, and he shouldn't have been doing it, because like we were all on lockdown, we weren't allowed to walk there because of what was going on.
I was closed for nearly 7 months, mate, and he should lead by example. If he could go to a garden party, why couldn't I serve my customers? And a lot of them, older ones, we don't see now because they died for COVID, or they're too scared to come out.
How do you feel about the whole situation? Tell me your thoughts. How are you feeling?
Let down. Miserable. We can't do what they can do. Why? He hasn't done what he's supposed to have done. He's the Prime Minister.
He's going to lead by example.
Tell the truth. Help people, don't hurt them. Because he's going to lose a lot of people.
So you can hear there how emotions are running high here in Leigh. A sense of frustration, a sense of annoyance towards the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and the Conservative Party. Because remember, for many people who voted a couple of years ago in that last election, they voted for a Prime Minister that they thought was somebody a bit different compared to previous politicians, somebody that came with a breath of fresh air. But in the air at the minute, as I say, a lot of frustration. But there are people here today. Just this morning, I've been here since about 6 o'clock today, just gauging the temperature again, you know, almost 24 hours later to find out how people are feeling. And actually, there are some people that are saying, look, he did a good job during COVID. The vaccination programme, much better compared to other European countries. Business doing well. I went into some bakeries this morning as they were opening up the doors ready for a day of trading. They said, actually, we've been getting grants. The furlough scheme has been a success. So actually, can we now say that he's got to resign because of one party? Some people don't think so. Some people tell me that they'll still vote for him, but others, though, say that the apology he gave yesterday simply doesn't go far enough.
Bradley, thank you very much for that. Bradley Harris there, of course, reporting from Leigh, which turned blue, didn't it? Labour stronghold went blue. Exactly the kind of place now that Boris really needs to cling on to.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do think, you know, undoubtedly there's going to be some people that are going to continue to back Boris, but I think people really need to put into perspective what's happened here. We're talking about a Prime Minister that's won an 80-seat majority as recently as 2019, who are now at 28% in the polls, you know, 10 points in some polls behind the Labour Party. That's quite a fundamental shift happening, where many of those voters who, for the first time, voted for Boris, who trusted him, are now looking elsewhere. And I think that I don't necessarily think it's the complete end for Boris, but I think he's going to have to pull it out the bag to regain the trust of those thousands, if not millions of people across the country that he's lost.
Oh, he definitely is. He absolutely is. But I would just urge people to just play the tape forward a little bit. What does it look like if Boris goes? What could it look like if Boris goes? There's obviously a lot of unknowns out there, but who's really going to take over from him? If you are a true Conservative, as it were, I don't really see how any true Conservative candidates are going to end up leading that party after Boris. If you vote for Labour, what are you really voting for? You quite possibly vote for Scottish independence if you vote for Labour Party.
Patrick, you say that, but I mean, is that really how we want our democracy to be run?
No, actually, but I'm just saying facts are facts.
It's not about a vision for the future. It's not about policies that are transforming the country and improving people's lives. It's, there's fear about the possible unintended consequences. I think we've got to have higher expectations of our politicians. I
agree with you, but I think it's a sad reality. I think it's just a sad fact of where we are, at the moment. I have a look around and I go, well, all right, OK, what happens if Boris goes? And do we all necessarily want that?
But the other argument could be that actually, if he does go, then it really shows to politicians that if you mess up, there are consequences.
That's very true. That's very true. Well, look, hey, come on, let us know, I suppose.
Send us your views.
At GBNews.uk. It's not quite divided the studio. We get on pretty much most things, but it's nice to have the debate, isn't it? Right, so now moving away from that, 1 in 15 people in England had COVID in the first week of 2022. That's according to the latest data from the Office for National Statistics, which is a very difficult word for me to say, which also shows that infections across Yorkshire and the Humber have now soared above the levels last seen in London before Christmas.
Yes, indeed. Wow. What impact is all of this having on the region? Let's speak now to our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Kevin Larkin, who's in Rotherham and has been monitoring this situation for us. Tell us more, Kevin.
Yes, good morning, Anaya. Good morning, Patrick. So 1 in 15 people in England had COVID in the week ending the 6th of January. In the other nations of the UK, it was 1 in 20, so slightly less, but not a huge difference. But the interesting story is the peak. Obviously, we saw this peak in London on the 23rd of December, this Omicron wave just before Christmas. Now, that seems to have spread out across the country, and the Office for National Statistics says that almost every English region has seen cases rise recently. But interestingly, as you were saying, the peak here in Yorkshire per 100,000 is actually higher than the one we saw in London. But interestingly, looking at the most recent data, in the last couple of days, we've seen a fall-off in the cases here in Yorkshire. So potentially we may have hit the peak here. But of course, we need a bit longer before we can definitively come to that conclusion.
Do you mind me asking as well, what's the actual kind of just mood like there, really? Are people quite scared, do you think, Kevin?
I don't know about scared, Patrick, but what I can tell you anecdotally is I've had lots of friends who have come down with COVID recently. In most cases, it does seem to have thankfully been relatively mild from what I've heard and what I've seen on social media and so on. The biggest impact has actually been around staff disruption, and that has been particularly bad in schools, with the schools going back over the last week. And I asked Laura Moore, who's the principal of the Bruntcliffe Academy in Morley, how bad the disruption's been.
Has been significant. We've seen a large increase in the cases of COVID-19. We've got almost 9% of our young people who have been affected since we came back in January, whether that be for a shorter period of time while they've been isolating and awaiting a result, or whether that be that they have tested positive. We've also seen here at Bruntcliffe 15% of our workforce affected, and I know across the Gorse Academies Trust that has been at times in excess of a quarter, if not with some schools almost a third of staff being affected by COVID-19. So it has had a significant impact.
Yeah. And on top of that, that's led to some impacts. They've seen teachers working on their days off, staff brought in from across trusts. But Laura also told me about some of the bigger impacts she's seen at her school.
Had to at times look at collapsing classes, and staff have volunteered to take groups, for example, 3 groups in the main hall, and in some of our schools across the Gorse Academies Trust we have had to look at closures of year groups on a rota basis, but ensuring that obviously we have that provision in line with government guidance for children who need to be in school.
Yeah, Kevin, do we know how this is affecting the NHS then?
Well, interesting, Patrick, you talked about the sort of the fear potentially that people have. What we have seen is an unusual response to this from the Mid Yorkshire NHS Trust. They're actually asking people to keep their appointments for things like cancer screenings and other hospital appointments because they've had a lot of people phoning up to cancel. Now, they're not clear entirely how much of that is down to people potentially being fearful of catching COVID while they're in hospital or whether people feel they want to ease the burden on the NHS. But Trudy Davis, who's the Chief Operating Officer at the Mid Yorkshire Trust, says it's really important that people keep those appointments.
People are anxious, they listen to the national advice, which is absolutely correct, to try and avoid social contact as much as possible. And they think that as the NHS is under pressure, that we won't be offering those appointments. Mostly it's a good intent and people trying to support the NHS, which we are extremely grateful for. But our job as an NHS is to look after patients. And we provide a service and we want to do that. And we will do that for as long as we possibly can. So those patients that are invited to an outpatient appointment, we urge them to keep it. And we will do our best to keep them safe if they can do their best to keep us.
Well, NHS England says they're doing everything they can to help individual trusts to get through this period. But we're expecting more detail even later on today about staff absence numbers as well, Patrick. So we should get a bigger picture later on this afternoon.
Fantastic.
Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin Larkin, our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, giving us the latest update on COVID. And we're also joined now by Dr. Lawrence Buckman, a GP and former chairman of the British Medical Association's GP Committee. Welcome to the programme. Could you just let us know, are COVID cases still rising?
Depends where you are. Where I am in London, they're just starting to go down now, slowly. And of course, there are still plenty of people in hospital and sadly still some deaths. But the numbers are now going down in London, and I'm guessing we will gradually see that change arise in the rest of the country.
Yeah, OK. It's good news, I suppose, for some parts of the country, but I suppose isn't it kind of good news everywhere in a way at the moment, because Omicron does appear to be milder and also more transmissible, and this maybe could be another avenue for us out of this thing. Just we've got you on, obviously, because you were head of the GP committee. How would you assess GPs' performances during this pandemic so far? It has at times seemed like a struggle to get them to go into their surgeries.
Yes, I don't think that's true. I think GPs have done their best in remarkably difficult circumstances. They've had to keep up with COVID restrictions, which really means keeping the place clean after every patient goes in. So it's therefore not in the generality of patients' interest to come to the surgery. And that, of course, has got to change now because we're going to have to live with COVID and we've got to find ways of getting people safely in and out of the surgery. GPs have been open throughout the pandemic. I know there has been a mood in the press that, and amongst some of the public that they haven't been able to get what they regard as reasonable access. And I'm sad for any patient who's felt like that. But the vast majority of GPs have seen more patients than they did in pre-pandemic years. Seen, not just talked to on the phone. So there clearly has been a significant workload for GPs. I think most GPs are now partly relieved that the COVID pressure is starting to go down. But of course, recognising the amount of unmet need in the community is enormous. And they're now going to have to work extra hard to clear that backlog, which I'm sure is substantial.
Yeah, well, we were talking a bit yesterday, actually, about some NHS hospital trusts being in quite a bad way. I mean, they've self-identified as being in a critical state, haven't they? Ambulances potentially outside hospitals piling up. And unfortunately, what it was we had an exclusive interview with an emergency worker who was saying that people were dying in the back of ambulances sometimes, waiting to get in to the hospitals. How bad is that situation? And what can be done about it? Because it can't just be about more money, can it? What needs to be done?
It's not really about money at all. It's about getting people who are in hospital out of hospital and back to their homes or a place of safety. You almost need a step-down hospital that isn't really a hospital, but it looks after people who are not yet able to go home. Social care is the biggest problem. Community services are being cut and cut and cut. And we've been telling governments for years that if you keep on cutting social care and district services, you're going to end up with people who are stuck in hospital. And that's where we are now. And that's really not to do with money. It's to do with growing the right kind of staff in the right place. If you have hospitals full of people in beds who shouldn't be there, A&E fills up, ambulances then can't discharge their patients, and the ambulances can't go and do their job, which is finding more sick people.
Well, and also, Dr. Buckman, there was a controversy with Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, a few days ago, where a doctor confronted him on mandatory vaccinations for NHS staff and saying he's not vaccinated and he's got COVID antibodies, why should he lose his job? And there are thousands across the service that are in fear of that also. What is your position on that? Do you think that jabs should be compulsory for NHS staff, despite the fact that we're also already facing shortages?
I don't like the idea of compulsion for anybody. I think we should be arguing on intellectual grounds why you should or shouldn't have a vaccine. I'm very sad that one of my colleagues chose to voice his hostility to vaccines in public. I think that's really unfortunate, and I wish he wouldn't have done that, but he has. So we have to live with the fact that we have colleagues who don't want to be vaccinated, and it's not amazing that there are some doctors who don't want to be. My view.
Sorry, just quickly on that. Sorry, why? Because what you're advocating for there by saying that you don't particularly, you wish he hadn't voiced, as you said, hostility. I mean, it's his own view, isn't it? I mean, what, you think everyone who works in medical service should just shut up and swallow it?
Absolutely not. I think doctors should lead by example. And the example, if you don't wish to be vaccinated, is probably not to use an opportunity in front of the television to voice your views about vaccination.
He was asked the question by Sajid Javid. He asked, what are your views? And then he expressed them. But he mentioned that he has antibodies, which were, in some sense, evidence that there are similar rates to vaccination if you've had COVID. And I think, isn't that just a fair position to hold?
It's a completely fair position to hold, but without explanation and context, it's very difficult to understand what a simple couple of sentences. The fact that I've just said to you, I don't really believe in compulsory vaccination, which I don't, doesn't mean that I can't concede. If we have another few hours, I could explain to you why I think there are certain kinds of worker who probably do need to be compulsorily vaccinated. And I certainly think people who are in hospital who look after COVID patients probably need either to have antibody assessments, which this doctor has done, or to be vaccinated. And I just don't think you can take no action for doctors and nurses and others in particularly dangerous situations. But I think that needs a lot more explanation and context.
OK, all right. Well, look, interesting stuff, Dr. Lawrence. And it's nice to have a bit of back and forth as well, I must say, Dr. Lawrence Buckman there, GP and former chairman of the British Medical Association's GP Committee. Thank you very much for making the time for us. Right, keep all your thoughts coming in. We're going to be here all the way through until midday. GB Views at gbnews.uk. We'll be back with more of your top stories and plenty more of this after the break. Time for the weather.
Hello again. A dry day for the vast majority, and there'll be some decent sunny spells for many as well. But it will be cloudier and breezier in the north, especially the far north of Scotland, where there will be some outbreaks of generally light rain and drizzle through Thursday as these weather fronts approach. And you can see the tighter isobars there bringing a breezier day for much of Scotland. But closer to the area of high pressure that dominates things further south, we've seen a frosty and, in some places, foggy start to the day. And in fact, in one or two spots, those fog patches could continue into the early afternoon, particularly Devon and Somerset. Otherwise, plenty of sunshine for much of England, Wales, eastern Scotland, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, seeing some brighter spells as well. But thicker cloud for the north of Scotland, a strong wind here. However, it is mild, 10 or 11 Celsius. Colder further south, where we see especially some fog lasting into the afternoon. And that fog quickly reforms during the evening. Some dense fog overnight then, perhaps more widespread compared to the last couple of nights, and especially for the West Midlands, the Welsh Marches into the West Country. And a frosty night to come, widely below freezing across England and Wales, but milder for Scotland because of the cloud and more persistent rain there heading into Orkney and the far north of the mainland. Staying breezy in the far north, the winds eventually moderating across the Northern Isles during tomorrow. Otherwise, light winds further south, and that will allow some of those dense fog patches to last again into the early afternoon. And where that happens, temperatures will really struggle. They won't really lift it above freezing, I think, in 1 or 2 spots, particularly around river valleys where that fog lasts. Again, fog becoming more widespread once more into Friday nights, especially this time across central, northeast and eastern England. I think a bit breezier further south, so low cloud more likely here. And cloudy skies will be the theme on Saturday, perhaps becoming a bit clearer on Sunday, but many places stay dry.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
A very good morning. It's 2 minutes past 11. I'm Rosie Wright in the GB News newsroom. Let's get you up to date. Boris Johnson has cancelled a visit to a vaccination clinic in Lancashire today because a family member has tested positive for coronavirus. He's facing growing calls to quit as Prime Minister from some senior Conservative MPs, including the Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross. Boris Johnson apologised yesterday for attending a bring-your-own-booze party in the Downing Street Garden in May of 2020 when the country was in lockdown. Well, voters in Leigh and Greater Manchester are divided on whether the Prime Minister should stay in his job.
We'll look back at this and we'll probably say, you know, he's done a good job in the circumstances he was in, but could he have done things better? Yes, he could. Has he made mistakes? He certainly has.
He sounded all right at the beginning, but he's not now. He's just contradicted every rule he's made for everybody else follow, but not doing it himself.
I don't think he's doing so bad with all this corona and that. I don't think he's done so bad.
Literally, by example, if he could go to a garden party, why couldn't I serve my customers?
England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jonathan Van Tam, is leaving his role at the end of March. He's been one of the key scientific figures during the coronavirus pandemic and was recently knighted in the New Year Honours List. The Prime Minister has thanked him for his invaluable advice. Prince Andrew faces the prospect of giving evidence in court later this year in New York. It's after a US judge threw out a motion to dismiss a civil sex abuse case against the royal. The judge ruled a 2009 agreement between his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein didn't extend to the prince. Ms. Giuffre is suing Prince Andrew over claims he sexually assaulted her when she was 17, 2 decades ago. The prince denies all allegations. An attorney who represented 20 of Epstein's victims, Gloria Allred, says testifying under oath won't be easy for Prince Andrew.
He's going to have to do a risk analysis, Prince Andrew. And of course, there's not going to be a settlement unless Virginia offers to settle and gets what she thinks she should get for a settlement. Her lawyers also have to assess the risk to her if she doesn't settle.
France has lifted its ban on UK holidaymakers. The French tourism minister says thousands of people who booked ski trips will now be able to hit the slopes from tomorrow. Fully vaccinated travellers will be required to have a negative COVID test, though, within 24 hours of departure. They won't have to isolate when they arrive in the country. Latest figures show a record 6 million people in England were waiting to start routine hospital treatment. NHS England say those figures are for November of last year, and the number of people waiting for treatment is now at its highest since records began in 2007. There's a warning: the care system for disabled and older people is under grim and relentless pressure during the pandemic. The National Care Forum, which represents not-for-profit care providers across the UK, says existing staff shortages are being exacerbated by absence caused by the Omicron variant of coronavirus. Well, the government says it is providing more than £460 million to help recruit and retain care staff. An investigation has found that more than 110,000 people who had their benefits cut by mistake have been denied compensation. The Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman has called for ministers to correct what he called an injustice caused by errors from the Department of Work and Pensions. The government says it has since corrected the mistake and paid arrears totalling £613 million to those affected. They didn't address the issue of compensation. Post-Brexit talks resume today. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is going to hold face-to-face meetings for the first time as the UK's lead negotiator. She's invited her EU counterpart, Maros Sefcovic, to her official country house to discuss the problems with the Northern Ireland Protocol. The Foreign Secretary says Europe has a clear responsibility to help protect the Good Friday Agreement. Tennis player Novak Djokovic has been included in the Australian Open first-round draw, despite Australia still considering cancelling his visa. The Serbian was drawn against his fellow countryman, Milomir Kecmanovic, in the first round. The draw was postponed for 75 minutes without explanation. A decision from Australia's immigration minister on whether the world number one can stay in the country is not expected until Friday. You are up to date here on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's return to the point.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falaran Iman, and Patrick Christys on your TV and on your radio. We've got a show full of all of the big stories and big discussions that you care about, so here's what's on the menu.
Yes, well, Boris Johnson apologises, but do you think it's enough to save him? The Prime Minister continues to plummet in the polls, and now some of his own MPs are actually calling on him to resign. We'll be getting your views on all of this as well, and as I asked at the start of the show, do you think that they should hand back the COVID fines? Your thoughts?
Yes, and also send your views, like should he stay or should he go? But also, a judge in the US unequivocally rejected Prince Andrew's lawyer's bid to have his sex abuse case thrown out of court. What does this mean for the Prince and the royal family?
Indeed, and coming up in our head-to-head, you are not going to want to miss this, people. Should the unvaccinated be treated differently in the workplace? We've got John Gaunt, that's right. He doesn't pull any punches, does he? Going up against the one and only Dominique Samuels, so you're going to want to tune into that.
Yes, and as I just said, get in touch with your views as usual, gbviews at gbnews.uk.
Boris Johnson's future as Prime Minister obviously hangs in the balance following calls for his resignation, especially some from within his own party. Now, yesterday in Parliament, the PM apologised for a Bring Your Own Booze party that took place in the Downing Street Garden in May 2020 when the rest of the country was in lockdown.
Yes, well, he claims he thought it was just a work event. The scandal has prompted furious Tory MPs to call for his resignation, while Boris Johnson hopes the outcome of an independent investigation will save him. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, joins us now live from Downing Street. Good morning again, Darren. I mean, what is the latest going on with Boris Johnson as he is plummeting now in the polls? It is looking more and more difficult for his position.
Yeah, it is another tricky morning, of course, for the Prime Minister, who is effectively isolating himself. He was due to go and visit a vaccination centre in Lancashire this morning, Anaya, but a close relative has tested positive, so he has limited his movements today. Some might suggest not necessarily the worst news in the world for the Prime Minister, because inevitably on that visit he would have faced further questions about that party in the Downing Street Garden back in May 2020. As for the mood within the Conservative Party itself, it remains pretty tumultuous in many regards. MPs privately pretty frustrated, angry somewhat, even at that apology or that semi-apology yesterday by Boris Johnson in the Commons, and a sense that this is doing real damage, not just to the Prime Minister, but indeed to the government and to the Conservative Party. You only have to listen to radio phone-ins or indeed to the people that we've been talking about up and down the country today to get a sense of the public mood in all of this. Now, only 4 have come out publicly to say that they want to see the Prime Minister resign. That's 4 Conservative MPs, way below the 54 that's needed to trigger a leadership race. Though we do know the Scottish contingent of the Conservative Party, all the MSPs in the Parliament north of the border have said they want to see him go. I think largely, though, while privately many are frustrated, they are going to wait for this investigation by Sue Gray, the senior civil servant, to find out the detail in all of this. And that is then when I think there'll be a crucial moment again for the Prime Minister, when that detail is laid out in front of MPs, and he'll have to go back to the Commons and explain yet again what went on, not just on May 20th, it should be said, Patrick and I, but indeed at a whole series of parties within government in 2020.
Well, thank you so much for bringing us that update, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor here at GB News.
I think you're going to call him political hero then. I thought I was going to nearly came out. He is, eh? Why not? Right, now, Boris Johnson, of course, is up against it. Whether or not you think he should be, he is. And can he fight the flames, or is he toast? Well, joining us now is Tony Diver, political correspondent for The Telegraph. Welcome, Tony. Can I just ask you a question that maybe people have been missing at the moment? I don't know. If Boris Johnson goes, right, what happens? Because from where I'm sitting, the Conservative Party won't get a particularly Conservative leader. You could argue maybe he's not been the most Conservative so far anyway. You've got presumably a general election a bit down the line, maybe a year or so perhaps, and, potentially a Labour victory, and then you've got Scottish independence. I mean, there's a lot that can happen here if Boris goes, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that will be what's on the mind of a lot of these Conservative backbenchers who are concerned about Boris Johnson's future, people who are thinking about putting their letters into Sir Graham Brady in the 1922 committee. They say, well, if we force a Tory leadership election now, what then happens? I mean, perhaps there's a leadership race. If Boris Johnson doesn't get the 50% of Tory MPs that he needs to win a no-confidence vote, then the question becomes who makes it into the final 2 as part of that ballot. Could it be Liz Truss? Could it be Rishi Sunak? Could Michael Gove have a third run at it? But the party basically needs to sort all of this stuff out before it goes back to the country, we think probably in May 2024. They really can't risk this still being sorted out in the summer of 2023. Basically, if you're a Tory backbencher who's concerned about the Prime Minister, you need to get on with it.
And Tony, isn't that the crux of it? Because there is still a lot of love for Boris in the country. I think, the vaccine rollout has been quite successful for him and he's been able to bounce and capitalise off of that, but maybe not fully. Isn't what really saves Boris now actually resetting his leadership, actually starting to really realise the potential of what people voted for him for in 2019?
Yeah, I mean, and the government's got plenty of bits of legislation coming up which were in their manifesto. We've been waiting for the Levelling Up white paper, which is meant to set out what this government is really about. Boris Johnson has always said that levelling up is what he was elected to do. We've been told that probably at the end of this month or the beginning of next month, we'll get a real sense of how Boris Johnson plans to level up parts of the north, areas that the Tories feel have been undervalued in politics over the last few years. So, yeah, I mean, it's fair to say that the domestic agenda for the Tories has been pretty overlooked in the last couple of years because of the coronavirus pandemic. The question is just whether or not he has the support to be able to go forward and fulfil it. I mean, a lot of those 2019 Tory backbenchers who stand to get a lot of money from this levelling up drive now have kind of lost confidence in the Prime Minister. I was talking to one of them yesterday who said that Boris Johnson used to be the biggest asset that Red Wall MPs have, and now he's the biggest liability. So whether or not they still believe in him to deliver that agenda, I think is perhaps a slightly different question.
Yeah, fantastic. Good stuff, Tony. Well, look, it's a bit short and sweet, but it's great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. Tony Diver there, political correspondent from The Telegraph. Well, look, OK, we've decided that following on, of course, from the fiasco of yesterday's Prime Minister's questions, we've been wondering just how vulnerable Boris actually is.
Yes, with Labour pulling ahead in the polls before the latest party revelations, could this add to their momentum? We're now joined in the studio by Ben Bradshaw, Labour MP for Exeter. Thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Morning. I mean, Labour are now getting ahead of the Tories in the polls. But is that an effective strategy to essentially let the Conservatives destroy themselves? I mean, what is Labour's alternative vision that can actually realise the aspirations and desires of ordinary people?
It's not enough. It's certainly not enough. No opposition can ever rely on the government to make enough mistakes for the public then to have enough trust in that opposition. No, we still have a big job of work to do. I think Keir Starmer absolutely recognises that. He's said that time and time again after the disaster of Jeremy Corbyn. I think he's made a very good start. We are ahead in the polls. A lot of that's probably to do with Partygate, and I think this year we'll see Keir coming out with a very clear policy programme and a vision for the country that the public will find attractive, not least in the contrast of the personalities of the Prime Minister and Keir Starmer.
If it emerges that Keir Starmer broke the rules, does he have to go as well?
If Keir Starmer broke the law, any politician, I think, in a leadership position of that kind would have to consider their position. There's no suggestion, as far as I'm aware, that he ever has or ever would. In fact, he's been absolutely poor man. He's been in self-isolation sort of umpteen times.
Well, he's been shackled away, hasn't he? He's turned Islington into Beirut.
He's been extremely unlucky, and as far as I'm aware, he's stayed absolutely meticulously to all of the rules and all of the guidance, unlike the Prime Minister.
All the time, 100% of the time?
Yes, I mean, from memory, I'm trying to remember where I was in that lockdown and what rules they were, at what time they were. But, I mean, I remember at the time of this party that all I could do was spend some time, I think, with my recently bereaved brother-in-law. My sister died just before lockdown, and we had to stay 2 metres apart. That's all we could do. And I know many, many others will have had much, much harder times than that and stuck to the rules. And that's why I think you have such a strong level of public anger against the Prime Minister.
Well, and just sticking on that trust point as well, I mean, Keir Starmer, even though he is now kind of criticising Boris, I mean, his trust or the trust of the public was damaged by Keir Starmer and Jeremy Corbyn's government. Keir Starmer was instrumental in the kind of second referendum policy, which is actually partly responsible for how Boris Johnson got the 80-seat majority in the first place. So even though we have moved on slightly, not completely, from the kind of Brexit turmoil, do you really think that, for example, Red Wall voters that historically voted Labour can really trust Keir Starmer to take democracy and their aspirations seriously?
Well, I don't quite share your analysis of that. I mean, I think Jeremy Corbyn played a much, much bigger role in the 2019 election result than Brexit did, and all of the analysis shows that. But Keir was also reflecting what was quite a strong body of opinion in the country, that we were deadlocked over Brexit, Parliament couldn't decide, and that one way out of this was to get a deal and then put that deal to the people in the confirmation reformation. That was a perfectly legitimate position to hold at that time. It reflected strong views in the Labour Party. It also reflected quite a lot of people's views in the country, and Brexit hasn't exactly turned out well, has it? But Brexit's happened now. That's all over. And I think Keir has made absolutely clear he has a very different leader from Jeremy Corbyn.
Will the Labour Party harness Brexit? I mean, I saw Andrew Adonis on Twitter, saying that if Boris goes, Brexit goes. Do you share that view, or do you actually think a new Labour Party should actually capitalise on Brexit and turn it into something positive?
Andrew's a great guy, but he doesn't speak for Keir Starmer or the Labour Party. Keir couldn't have made clearer that Brexit has happened. It's done. We have to try to make the best of it, and heavens, it's not going terribly well, is it? And I'm sure there are things we could do to improve some of the trade issues we've had, the Northern Ireland issue. Lots of problems still to be solved. And the problem with this government is the Prime Minister can't give these any attention, because he's lurching from one scandal and one crisis to another because of his own behaviour, but also his own character.
And
you were saying earlier, could he get back authority?
I don't think he can change. Borders? Do you think the
Prime Minister can change? Do you think he can change?
Would the Labour Party support stronger borders. I mean, that was one of the issues when it comes to Brexit. Do you think the Labour Party will support bringing down immigration?
Well, immigration's going up at the moment because we desperately need workers. I mean, come on. Our health service and our social care system and many businesses are suffering from chronic labour shortages because of a shortage of workers. We need migrant labour to contribute to our economy. Yes, it has to be managed, and that's what Labour would do. But the Prime Minister's approach to this is simply block his ears, ignore the pleas of business, for more skilled workers, and that is damaging our economy as well. But the main problem is he can't focus on the issues that matter to the country because he's just lurching from one crisis to another.
There is an element of truth in that, absolutely. I've let you get away a couple of times with the Brexit side of things, but anyway, I'd just like to get your take on Scotland, right? Because that is a big issue for people. Now, I've heard, anyway, Gordon Brown, his plan would be to field pro-independence Scottish Labour candidates, right? The implication there being that if Labour then did manage to win a general election, that it would give Scotland a vote on Scottish independence pretty quickly and presumably back it. Is that true?
Well, I think it would be very unlikely that what Gordon Brown would have to do with this. If Gordon Brown is no longer in the House of Commons, those decisions will be made by the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer.
You don't think he'd be quite inclined to give Scotland another vote, then?
Gordon has been the most pro-union Labour politician that I can think of. I mean, all of Gordon's lifetime efforts have been geared towards preserving the union. Yes, giving legitimate self-rule to Scotland in the Scottish Parliament, and the Labour government was the architect of that, and you can't ignore, yes, the Scottish people's democratic right to determine their own future. But no, I mean, you couldn't get a politician more committed to the union than Gordon Brown.
Would you just into that, because obviously you've been a very vocal critic of Brexit. That was a democratic expression of our right to freedom, wasn't it? And they wanted a reversal there. If you felt passionately that Scottish independence was the wrong thing and they voted for it, would you campaign hard to get that vote overturned?
I think the answer to this is to get a Labour government that Scotland can live with.
What would you do?
I think the solution, I'm giving you the solution. The solution is to elect a Labour government under Keir Starmer that supports the union, that would respect Scotland's wishes and desires, because the problem at the moment is the Scots never vote Tory. They didn't vote for Brexit, and they're ruled by Boris Johnson, who they think's a complete idiot. That's doing more damage to the union than any damage Labour or Keir Starmer would ever do.
But we do know that actually, Labour have not been doing well in Scotland at all. They've effectively been superseded by the SNP. So it'll be very difficult for Keir Starmer to win a majority unless he starts to make a significant impact.
We are, which we are doing.
Within Scotland.
Which we're doing. We're up in the polls in Scotland very well.
Okay.
Keir has made a big difference in Scotland. I mean, Corbyn was very unpopular in Scotland, as he was in the rest of the country. So we're on the up in Scotland, but the way to maintain the union is to elect a Labour government that respects all elements of the union, rather than the Conservative Party, which has basically become the English National Party, hasn't it? They don't care about Scotland or Northern Ireland anymore. And the way that Jacob Rees-Mogg treated the Scottish Conservative leader in that interview last night, calling him a lightweight. Okay. I mean, they're fighting like rats. That's doing more damage to the union for a party that claims to be a unionist party.
Ben, well, really appreciate you coming in. Really appreciate you making the time for us. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. And we're a broad church here at GB News, despite what some people may say, and it's great to have that range of views. Ben Bradshaw there, Labour MP for Exeter. Thanks again, Ben. So after the break, we'll be talking about the money in your pocket. That's right. As the cost of living goes through the roof, what should the government do to protect the most vulnerable? Stay tuned. It's the weather now. Hello again. A dry day for the vast majority, and there'll be some decent sunny spells for many as well. But it will be cloudier and breezier in the north, especially the far north of Scotland, where there will be some outbreaks of generally light rain and drizzle through Thursday as these weather fronts approach. And you can see the tighter isobars there bringing a breezier day for much of Scotland. But closer to the area of high pressure that dominates things further south, we've seen a frosty and in some places foggy start to the day. And in fact, in one or two spots, those fog patches could continue into the early afternoon, particularly Devon and Somerset. Otherwise, plenty of sunshine for much of England, Wales, eastern Scotland, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland seeing some brighter spells as well. But thicker cloud for the north of Scotland, a strong wind here. However, it is mild, 10 or 11 Celsius. Colder further south, where we see especially some fog lasting into the afternoon. And that fog quickly reforms during the evening. Some dense fog overnight then, perhaps more widespread compared to the last couple of nights, and especially for the West Midlands, the Welsh Marches into the West Country. And a frosty night to come, widely below freezing across England and Wales, but milder for Scotland because of the cloud and more persistent rain there heading into Orkney and the far north of the mainland.
staying breezy in the far north. The winds eventually moderating across the Northern Isles during tomorrow. Otherwise, light winds further south, and that will allow some of those dense fog patches to last again into the early afternoon. And where that happens, temperatures will really struggle. They won't really lift it above freezing, I think, in 1 or 2 spots, particularly around river valleys where that fog lasts. Again, fog becoming more widespread once more into Friday nights, especially this time across central, northeast and eastern England. I think a bit breezier further south, so low cloud more likely here. And cloudy skies will be the theme on Saturday, perhaps becoming a bit clearer on Sunday, but many places stay dry.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Yes, morning everybody. It is 11:27. This is To The Point with me, Patrick Christys, and Anaya Flanagan here on GB News. We're live on your TV, and yes, I know I keep banging on about it, but just do it anyway. You can listen to us on the radio.
Yes, indeed. Well, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has warned that an additional £3 billion is needed to support the poorest household amid concerns about the rising cost of living.
Yes, well, they say that the planned 3% increase to benefits is not enough to stop people from being pushed into fuel poverty. Eat or heat? That's always the big question, isn't it?
Yes, well, elsewhere, a recent poll has found recruiters were placing a record number of permanent and temporary workers into jobs. And earlier, Tesco confirmed 13,000 temporary Christmas staff are being kept on to help with COVID-related absences.
Well, there we go. Fantastic. So joining us now is Heidi Kardialainen, an economist at the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Thank you very much. Just explain this to us then. So basically, we're all feeling the pinch and essentially people on on benefits now as well. They're going to be bang in trouble, aren't they? Literally forced into poverty, is that right?
Well, essentially what we're seeing right now is that the Bank of England expects inflation to hit 6% in April 2022. Obviously, this is going to affect everyone. It's going to affect all of our living standards in the sense that it's eroding our spending power. But in particular, the households on lower incomes are going to be hit more. So those on benefits increase in line with inflation last September. So that means that benefits are only going to increase by 3%. And if the rate of inflation is actually 6%, that means a 3% real cut to increases in benefits. And of course, also the lower income households, they spend a larger share of their household budget on gas and electricity, which are the two sort of components of expenditure that are going up by more in terms of prices.
Yes, I mean, what can we do actually to protect people? And is there anything the government can do? It does seem that they're a bit ambivalent to actually doing something in relation to the cost of living right now.
Yeah, so I think the government at the moment is just kind of considering their options. A lot of people have been talking about abolishing the VAT on domestic fuel. Now, while that would help households, it would essentially help households across the board, but it would only reduce the kind of increase in energy prices by about a fifth. So it would help everyone, but at a cost of about £2.5 billion. Now, what we think is that the government should actually target the help that they want to give to households a lot more. So that's why we're talking about upgrading the benefits by more than the intended 3%, because that would then target the help to those households that are on lowest incomes in the UK.
Indeed. Well, look, Heidi, thank you very much. It's a very complicated subject, so you've done well to kind of succinctly whiz us through it all there. Heidi Cardilainen, an economist at the Institute for Fiscal Studies, just discussing essentially the fact that people basically could now be forced into poverty. And, you know, these are really, really depressing times where we go, well, look, very shortly, we're going to go to our head-to-head, and it is going to be box office, ladies and gentlemen. We've got John Gaunt against Dominic Samuels, but before that, we're going to go to some views, GB Views at GBNews.uk. Just quickly before we sneak off, Boris is being asked to resign over a glass of wine in his own back garden, but Tony Blair gets a nighter. Trevor, I can see why you might think there's a slight discrepancy there. I mean,
yes.
Boris Johnson didn't carpet bomb his own garden, did he?
A few people are commenting on Ben Bradshaw's views on immigration, saying that if Labour got in, there'll be much more immigration than we have now. I mean, I really do. I was saying this to you in the break. I think we need to question an economic model that continually relies on bringing in people from poorer countries that are low skilled. I mean, don't we want to rethink that model?
Yeah, I agree. And I also think as well, a couple of people kind of laughing a little bit about the question that I asked Ben Bradshaw about him, whether or not he'd rally against Scottish independence. I do find it interesting now, what's going to happen if a lot of these people who were dead against leaving the European Union, these big Remainers, if they're pro-union, right, and Scotland votes to leave, then what happens there? Do they campaign for a second referendum on that?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm someone that is very strong pro-union. I'm unashamed about that. But if Scotland voted to leave the United Kingdom and within a couple of years it didn't necessarily go great, that doesn't necessarily mean the process is over. And I think the similar thing with Brexit, it's the beginning. It is freedom. You know, and we need to harness that in order to realise the potential of it. It's not an instant thing. Shows a lack of imagination, in my view.
Yeah, exactly. Well, look, but also, just to finish off this little roundup of GB Views, thank you very much, everyone who's been getting in touch. GB Views at GBNews.uk. This is exactly where we are in the inbox at the moment. Tracy, I support Boris 100%. It's blindingly obvious there's a witch hunt against him. And then here we go. Foz has been in touch. Boris has got to go. One rule for them and one rule for us. We're split.
Very quickly, lots of people thinking that I am against Boris. No, that is not the case. If he realises the potentials of what 2019 was about, immigration, sovereignty, levelling up, all of that, I'm here for it. Getting hard on...
All right, well, without any further delay, we're going over now to Rosie with the news.
A very good morning to you. It is 11:33. I'm Rosie Wright in the GB News newsroom. Let's get you up to date. Boris Johnson has cancelled a visit to a vaccination clinic today. Downing Street say it's because a family member has tested positive for coronavirus. Well, it's as the Prime Minister's facing growing calls to quit from some senior Conservative MPs, including the Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross. Boris Johnson has apologised for attending a bring-your-own-booze party in the Downing Street garden in May of 2020, when the country was first in lockdown. England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jonathan Van Tam, is leaving his role at the end of March. He's been one of the key scientific figures during the coronavirus pandemic and was recently knighted in the New Year's Honours List. The Prime Minister has thanked him for his invaluable service. Prince Andrew faces the prospect of giving evidence in court later this year in New York. It's after a US judge threw out a motion to dismiss a civil sex abuse case against the royal. The judge ruled a 2009 agreement between his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein didn't extend to the prince. Ms. Giuffre is suing Prince Andrew over claims he sexually assaulted her when she was 17. He denies the allegations. A new report has found that England's rivers are filled with a chemical cocktail of sewage, agricultural waste and plastic. Well, that's the description based on the finding from a group of cross-party MPs who said the waterways were a risk to public health and to nature. Parliament's Environmental Audit Committee blamed England's dirty water on chronic underinvestment and multiple failures in governance. Tennis player Novak Djokovic has been included in the Australian Open first round draw, despite the country still considering cancelling the player's visa. The Serbian was drawn against his fellow countryman Miomir Kavamanovic in the first round. A decision from Australia's immigration minister on whether the world number one can stay in the country isn't expected until Friday. You're up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online, DAB plus radio as well. I'll have more for you later.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
It is 11:38, and this is To The Point with me, Patrick Christys, and Inaya Falariman on GB News. We're on your TV, and we're on your radio. Now, shortly, hopefully, we're going to be doing our head-to-head, but we wanted to continue with some of your views first, but actually, views in a different form, because we put a poll out on Twitter at GB News about whether or not you felt that political correctness has gone too far. Now, shock horror, more than 85% of you think that it has. But you may be wondering why we decided to run that poll today. And it was based off a story that actually you spotted, wasn't it?
Yes, well, two Oxbridge dons are essentially conflicting right now. One of them is been in the news several times over the last couple of years, Priya van der Gopal. She kind of writes about colonialism and so on. And essentially she has argued that another Oxford don might be essentially being racially insensitive for calling David Olusoga, the TV historian, the ethnic minority TV historian, eloquent.
What? Why?
She says that it's insinuating that they're only good at speaking and not actually having any substance. So you say, oh, very eloquent. Almost kind of patronising to suggest that. I mean, this is where we're at, folks.
But also this is impossible, right? It's become impossible. Someone's also commented, in fact, by the way, it's 97.5% of you actually who think that political correctness has gone too far. But it's impossible now, isn't it? I think up and down the country there are going to be people sat in boardrooms just clinging to their desk, shaking, sweat pouring down them as someone asks them a question and they just don't know what to say.
Well, exactly. I mean, this is what I've mentioned, I think many people have mentioned on this show, that it just seems that this is actually rolling back good relations between different people, because it's on this bad faith assumption that a compliment, that a misjudgment is somehow a manifestation of an underlying racism and hostility. I think that's a very dangerous way of thinking. And I think, if someone compliments me, I would take that in good faith.
All right. Stop fishing now, eh? All right, OK. Well, we're going to go on. We're going to go to our head-to-head now. We've kept you waiting long enough, ladies and gentlemen, and it's here. Now, this week, furniture store IKEA decided to cut the sick pay of its many unvaccinated staff. So IKEA aren't the only ones as well. Many other companies are considering or have actually implemented measures against staff who refused the vaccine. There's even talk of the Premier League doing it, actually. So we're asking, is this right? Should the unvaccinated be treated differently?
Well, joining us now to discuss this in our head-to-head is Dominic Samuels, a political commentator and writer, and John Gaunt, a radio talk show commentator. Well, I don't know if you guys both know the rules, but you both have 60 seconds each to state your case, and then we will ask you some questions. So first of all, Dominic, give us your 60 seconds.
Yeah, I think that this whole idea that the unvaccinated should be treated differently is disgusting, it's coercive, and it's discriminatory. And I think one of the curious things that we've seen throughout this pandemic is that all of a sudden people feel as though these discriminatory measures are completely appropriate when we don't take the same approach towards smokers, for example, and we don't take the same approach to those that are morbidly obese, despite the fact that the premise of this argument about treating unvaccinated people differently is that, they're overwhelming hospitals, they're overwhelming intensive care beds. This is quite frankly not true. The majority of people in ICU are not in there because of COVID, and about 41% of people at the moment that are in hospital are unvaccinated. And we have far more capacity than we've had in previous years and even previous waves. So unvaccinated people aren't overwhelming the hospital. So what is the basis of this? It's about imposing your moral view onto other people, and it's not right.
Dominic, all right, just a couple of seconds over, I think we'll let you off. John Gaunt, it's nice to have you on the show when you're rowing with somebody else and not me, actually, so I can put my feet up today. But John Gaunt, your 60 seconds starts now. Do you think that the unvaccinated should be treated differently in the workplace?
Yes, they should be. And the reason they should be is they're discriminating against themselves. The vaccine is completely free. Everybody can have it. Unless you've got a medical exemption, you spelt my name wrong. You should be rolling your sleeve up and getting vaccinated. The majority of people in intensive care are unvaccinated. And this discussion with Next is now, and indeed with the other company, IKEA, is not about that. It is about the fact that they want to not pay the full sick pay to people who have been in contact with somebody with COVID. Anybody who gets COVID, whether they're vaxxed or unvaxxed, will get the full amount of sick pay. And let me just tell you as well, IKEA pay more sick pay than they actually have to. So this whole debate is framed incorrectly. And Dominic, frankly, is hysterical on this issue. And of course, she's famously, I think, unvaccinated, but she certainly had COVID.
All right.
Ask you 60 seconds. Ask you 60 seconds. There are rules, John. There are rules. No, there are rules. There are rules, John.
Well, thank you for that. Wait.
You went over your 60. You went over your 60 seconds.
All right.
Go on.
Dominic, I'll start start with you.
You're right. My name.
All right, John.
And you framed the discussion wrong.
All right, John. Well, listen up.
Patrick, here we go.
All right, John, chill out a bit, OK? Dominique, oh, go on, you ask. You had a question.
Well, so my first question to you, Dominique, if I get my position. Anyway, so one of the questions that people, or one of the things that people put forward is, unlike losing weight or giving up smoking, that's quite a transformational life change. You know, going on a diet, you know, it might have something to do with addiction. There's all sorts of things around there. Whereas getting a vaccine is a very tiny, minor inconvenience for something that causes huge evidence is overwhelming about the protection that it gives you. So isn't it just, you know, it is right to say that these people are actually quite selfish and, you know, just completely self-interested when they can do something quite minor that can have a hugely positive impact for society?
I think that argument is based upon the idea that there are zero risks associated with being vaccinated, which is quite frankly not true. There are risks associated with being vaccinated. People have had allergic reactions and people have indeed died. Yes, when you look at the data, that is rare, but to act as though this is just a minor inconvenience, I don't think is true, because people do have to weigh up the benefits and the consequences of being vaccinated. And when we actually look at the facts here, the vast majority of people who catch COVID will either have mild or asymptomatic illness, and the vast majority of those will not die. In terms of risk to death with COVID, the vast majority of people who are most at risk are very elderly and very vulnerable, with at least 4 comorbidities, according to the CDC. So the idea that, you know, to not get vaccinated is a life or death situation, it's quite frankly not backed up by the data. So that's why we should have a common sense approach.
All right, OK. John, I'm just gonna put to you, look, you know, if these vaccines don't necessarily stop you getting COVID, obviously reduce the symptoms, don't get me wrong. It doesn't necessarily always stop transmission, etc. So someone who has had the jab can still get COVID and still have to take time off work. Why should someone who's not had the jab, who gets COVID and has to take time off work, not get their sick pay?
You see, this is where you're ill-informed, Patrick. You obviously don't understand the story. Let me quote...
No, that's the situation I've just created. I think you... No, John, I think you fundamentally misunderstood what's happening here. We were using IKEA as an example, as a launch pad, as it were, for a much wider discussion, which is literally what I'm asking you. So do you want to just do that?
The policy of IKEA is to give full statutory pay to everybody, whether they're vaccinated or not vaccinated.
John, no, we understand that. John, we understand that, but there's a wider... there's a wider...
Yeah, but
there's a wider debate. We're trying to... No, that's not true. We've given you a second. We've given you an opportunity. We just want to focus on the question.
I'm not going to talk to you.
John, I think
you've... be fair and balanced. Let me give you my view.
Right. Go on.
The facts are... Both Next, who have just announced this, which obviously you don't know yet, they've announced the same policy, same as Wessex Water. It is not being prejudiced against people who have not been vaccinated who get COVID. They will get full sick pay. What it's saying is people who have been self-isolating because they've been in contact with somebody, they don't want to pay the full sick pay to them. Now, I would have thought, Patrick, especially you, I don't know about you, Amaya, but Patrick, you're a Conservative. Surely you would be in favour of business not being all ripped off by people, perhaps swinging the lead. This is what this policy is about. You've just had a lady on. There's a massive labour shortage. This is about clearing this up. This is not about being discriminatory to the selfish fools who haven't been vaccinated, like Dominique, who ended up getting
statistics. It's mostly vaccinated people that are testing positive and mostly vaccinated people that are having to isolate as a result. What you're talking about is not backed up by any sort of...
Dominique, thank you. I just one second. I think, Firstly, John, we'd prefer if you don't call, you know, our other guests selfish fools. We can have this debate in a reasonable and fair way without getting personal.
Go on, tell me off.
No, I'm not telling you off. We just want to have a coherent conversation
about a very important... You are not allowing me to have my say. That's what
I think.
Right. For a fight. right, and we're having a discussion, and this is a prime example of people like you that do seem to be on your side, that don't want to talk about the data, that don't want to talk about the facts. You want to rant and rant and rant and refer to things that are not backed up by factual reality, and it's really embarrassing for a man of your age, to be quite honest.
I want to talk about the data. The reason,
all right, John,
the statistic you quoted is the way it is because the majority of people in this country have been vaccinated. So, of course, that your statistic then will add up. Dominic, answer my question.
I'm sorry.
Do you believe people should get full sick pay if they haven't been vaccinated?
Well,
go on.
COVID.
That's literally the question we've been trying to ask all along. So, yes, go on, Dominique. Do you think that's the case?
That question.
Sorry, what did he say? Because he's talking really fast. I can't quite follow.
Go on, John. Ask her again. Make sure we get it right.
Simple facts are this. This is not about people who have got COVID. These policies are about people who are isolating because they live in a house with somebody with COVID. My point is that's a good business decision.
Okay.
Let me finish, Dominique, so you understand. It's a good business position to take because it will get people back to work quicker. Now, are you against that?
I think what will get people back to work quicker is to stop forcing people to self-isolate for a virus that at the moment renders people only with mild or asymptomatic illness. This blanket policy of isolation if you come in contact with the positive case, I don't believe should apply anymore. Like they've done in South Africa, because of Omicron and how mild it is, and the fact that it's not overwhelming hospitals, and the fact that, the first peak has actually dipped because of how mild Omicron is. They've removed the quarantine and isolation restrictions because of that. So really, in response to that particular policy that forces people to isolate, I no longer think it should apply. But the question is, should unvaccinated people be treated differently? Personally, when I was contacted about this debate, I thought it was about Canada and the fact that there's been a policy proposed in Canada that discriminates against unvaccinated people. But in general, I don't think unvaccinated people should be treated differently now.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thank
We're going to have to go.
Thank you both we're out of time on this debate. Thank you both. Dominic Samuels, political commentator and
not diverted the question, John. It's written at the bottom of the screen. But anyway, John Gaunt, thank you very much for your time. And Dominic Samuels, thank you as well. Right, that was a proper head-to-head, wasn't it?
Well, that was undoubtedly heated. I think, I think it really just reveals actually where we're at. I mean, something quite fundamental that actually counters so many fundamental principles within our society, bodily autonomy, bodily integrity. We can't actually have an important and serious moral discussion about it without people getting very personal and getting very angry. And I think that the question was very clear from the beginning. Should unvaccinated people be treated differently? It's not just about the IKEA policy.
No,
We've seen this in relation to NHS staff being struck off potentially for not having vaccines. This is quite a widespread question. I think it's disappointing that some people may find it difficult to have a reasonable conversation about this.
Well, there we go. But look, hey, it is also an issue, obviously, that gets people very hot under the collar. It is an issue that I can fully understand why someone like John would feel as passionate as he did and as he does. And it is important that we do have a place where people can go and actually talk about that, and that's something that we need to do here. If we didn't have the John Gaunts of this world, then we couldn't have the other side of it as well, could we? So there we go.
No, I think you're right to say that a lot of people get very passionate about it, and that's why I put the question to Dominique. That actually, I sympathise a lot with John's perspective. That actually, I do think getting a vaccine is relatively minor inconvenience than perhaps losing weight or getting off a very.
Well, I'm trying to lose weight at the minute. I'd say, that's a massive inconvenience. Dear me, it's a huge inconvenience. Although, what I must say that I've done, so I put there's a lady who works outside, Poppy, and she brought in some nice kind of one of those chocolate cornflakey things, and she's banning me from eating them, right? She's banning me from eating them. She's walking around there like a tiny little starling, not allowing me to go and eat, and in the end I managed to sneak a bowl of midget gems in. So, Poppy, if you are watching, which you are, because I know you're just out there, I win.
Anyway, as we've hopefully had a bit of a breather from this intense head-to-head,
nice.
A new report has found that England's rivers are filled with the chemical cocktail of sewage, agricultural waste and plastic.
You're going to have to carry on for a minute here.
The findings published by a cross-party parliamentary group says it's putting public health and nature at risk. They say only 14% of English rivers meet good ecological statuses.
OK, back in the game now. There we go. And a rare Roman wooden figure has been found in a waterlogged ditch in Buckinghamshire, apparently. So the well-preserved ancient artefact was discovered by workers on the HS2 project. It's carved from a single piece of wood, and experts think it's almost 2,000 years old. Wow, look at that.
Wow, that is quite...
That's amazing. And we've got this on social media, so at GBNews, you can go and have a look at it.
Yeah, on our YouTube channel.
On our YouTube channel as well. But yeah, obviously, go and have a quick look at that if you can. It's fantastic. I mean,
I do love these remarkable archaeological finds. You know, because I don't know. I just think there's so much more to our history and our ancestors that we are yet to know. And I actually think that, you know, we may well discover that we are these very powerful and fascinating beings. I mean, the evidence is already
out there, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I also wonder whether or not it will halt the construction of HS2. Because if you find ancient artefacts and you find, you know, historic sites, my understanding was we couldn't just build on them, I don't think. So you never know. Maybe this could be the answer to people's prayers. It's like when people don't want a housing estate to pop up at the back of their house and they go to a pet shop and buy some kind of like rare newt or something and drop it at the end of the field and get the council around and go, well, it's an endangered habitat now. You can't possibly build on this.
I mean, I remember, like, I think Trump joked about building, you know, a Trump Tower in the Scottish Highlands.
Yeah.
Quite something.
Quite something. I thought he was going to buy... Wasn't he going to buy Greenland at one point as well or something like that?
He's a character indeed.
Well, I miss the guy. Anyway, right, OK, we're going to go to views and give you guys the final word. GBviews at gbnews.uk. I am a 59-year-old... A lot of these in response to our head-to-head. As you can imagine, it was pretty spicy. I'm a 59-year-old male with some comorbidities. I am unvaccinated, have COVID, and I'm absolutely fine. John has to default to insults and would do well to get some facts. That's also from John. That's a different John.
You know, there are undoubtedly a tiny risk of adverse impacts from the vaccine, but over 1 billion people worldwide have had the vaccine. You know, it is clearly effective in reducing serious risk and death from COVID. So I really do think we have to, you know, put that in front and centre. And so I do want to know, you know, if you haven't had the vaccine, what is really the rationale? You know, because I just think it's such a simple thing to do, especially if you're over 50. You know, it doesn't really make much sense to me why people wouldn't have the vaccine.
Well, I can understand that. Look, absolutely. It's, you know, it's a personal choice at the end of the day, isn't it? If it comes to the question of whether or not people should not receive sick pay if they get COVID and they're unvaccinated, I think I'd be more inclined to tolerate that view if the vaccine stopped you from getting COVID at all. But it doesn't, and therefore, you know, should someone who hasn't had it therefore get fined for catching COVID? I'm not sure, but anyway, your views, GBviews, gbnews.uk. But that is it from us here today, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. That's it from us, and to the point. But we'll be back tomorrow at the same time. Don't go away. But up next, it's The Briefing with Gloria De Piero. Thank you.
Hello again. A dry day for the vast majority, and there'll be some decent sunny spells for many as well. But it will be cloudier and breezier in the north, especially the far north of Scotland, where there will be some outbreaks of generally light rain and drizzle through Thursday as these weather fronts approach. And you can see the tighter isobars there bringing a breezier day for much of Scotland. But closer to the area of high pressure that dominates things further south, we've seen a frosty and in some places foggy start to the day. And in fact, in 1 or 2 spots, those fog patches could continue into the early afternoon, particularly Devon and Somerset. Otherwise, plenty of sunshine for much of England, Wales, eastern Scotland, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland seeing some brighter spells as well. But thicker cloud for the north of Scotland, a strong wind here. However, it is mild, 10 or 11 Celsius. Colder further south, where we see especially some fog lasting into the afternoon. And that fog quickly reforms during the evening. Some dense fog overnight then, perhaps more widespread compared to the last couple of nights, and especially for the West Midlands, the Welsh Marches into the West Country. And a frosty night to come, widely below freezing across England and Wales, but milder for Scotland because of the cloud and more persistent rain there heading into Orkney and the far north of the mainland. Staying breezy in the far north, the winds eventually moderating across the Northern Isles during tomorrow. Otherwise, light winds further south, and that will allow some of those dense fog patches to last